winner of 11 Emmy Awards, including Station Excellence. Thank you for your support.
The 2012 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting, the Republican race for the 4th Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Seri, reporter for the Southeast Bureau of Fox News Channel. We'd like to welcome our viewers and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the debate among the Republican candidates in Georgia's 4th Congressional District, which covers all of Rockdale County and parts of DeKalb and Gwinnett and Newton. Some of the largest cities in this region are Covington, Conyers, and Lithonia. Now let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Greg Pallen, he's a longtime Georgia resident, Conyers businessman and avid outdoorsman. J. Chris Vaughn is the lead pastor of Grace Summit Church, treasurer and secretary of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, and co-hosts a weekly cable show. Here's the format for today's debate. In the first round, each candidate will answer 2 questions from our panel. In the second round, the candidates will ask a question of their opponent. Each candidate will have time for rebuttal in this round. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. Now, before we get started, let's meet our 3 panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Tom Baxter, a columnist for the Supporter Report. Next is Walter Jones. He's a political reporter and news analyst for Morris News Service. And our final panelist is Michelle Wright, morning anchor for All News 106.7 radio here in Atlanta. Now let's get started with the debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked 2 questions by our panel. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer, and as moderator, I will determine if a rebuttal is necessary. By random selection, Greg Pallen will get the first question from Tom Baxter. Tom?
Mr. Pallen, on your website you say in a position statement that there has been, and I quote, massive corruption and a wholesale looting of the Treasury by the Federal Reserve Bank, which you advocate abolishing. How has the Federal Reserve done that, and are you saying that people who are board members of the Fed, like Herman Cain, were direct beneficiaries of some fraud on the government?
No, I'm not saying that at all. One of my endorsements of my campaign is G. Edward Griffin. He has written the official history of the Federal Reserve, which is the book Creature from Jekyll Island. My belief is that since 1913 and the formation of the Federal Reserve, we've had a massive increase in inflation, which has decreased the value of the American dollar by approximately 94%, which decreases the purchasing power of the dollar. Nixon obviously took us off the gold standard. These were paramount occasions in monetary history that have destroyed the value of the dollar. The bank bailouts, $750 billion. We're up to $16 trillion now. Foreign banks, the bailout of foreign banks, we have to stop these bailouts from occurring. I want to know why we need bailouts of foreign banks.
Walter Jones, it's your turn to ask Chris Vaughn a question.
Thank you for participating in the debate. If you're fortunate enough to get elected, one of your first votes would be about the debt ceiling. Would you vote to increase the debt ceiling, or would you risk pushing the country over the cliff?
Well, I don't think it's a question of pushing the country over the cliff if certain attitudes towards spending would be reduced. You know, all things considered, that first vote, to me, that would have to be, you'd have to take into consideration certain things economically, national security. As of today, I would vote no. I would specifically say that we need to curtail our spending, live within those fiscal responsibilities, and judge ourselves wisely so that we are not putting our children's children at a future risk. I know that sounds hard to some because people then immediately say, and I know too, actually if you do not extend the debt ceiling, congressional pay is cut. Many of the federal services are cut if that has to stop. So it would be a hard decision, but we're at a time in our country where we have to make hard decisions.
Michelle Wright, your question for Greg Pallen.
Mr. Pallen, what is the one issue that you feel is the most important to folks in the 4th District, and how do you intend to get that done or undone if you're elected?
That's a good question. From the thousands of people that I've talked to now and shaken hands with at all the different places I've been, and when I ask that question, what is important to you? What message do you want me to take to Washington? I typically hear jobs and taxes. I want a job and I want my taxes reduced. We can't lower taxes, we can't create jobs unless we can cut spending. If we can cut spending, we can reduce taxes, we can bring corporations back to America, get them back on American soil so they're not escaping to countries like Ireland with a 10% corporate tax rate. We have to cut spending. That's huge. And that's what I want to work on. In business, that's what I do every day. I balance budgets, I cut spending, I pinch pennies. That's why I think we need a businessman in Congress, and I think we need a lot of businessmen in Congress.
And our last question comes from Tom Baxter for Chris Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn, you had a question about a tough vote on the debt limit. There's another tough vote coming up next week on the Bush tax cuts. If you were in a situation where you could vote to extend, as the Democrats have advocated, extend those tax cuts for everybody who makes under $250,000 a year, but not for people who make more, would you accept that as a compromise?
I'm going to say no. The fact that there's anyone in America having the discussion with unemployment being what it is, the GDP being down to what it is, and actually wanting to continue to increase the rhetoric of raising taxes, I do not understand that conversation. If Walmart wants to make business, they drop prices, they cut. In a country that needs to increase revenue, I don't know where us charging the citizens of America even higher limits, especially in a down economy. I will say this, I think we ought to take what we can get sometimes, but to me that is not an arguable definition, because at this moment the conversation has been changed somewhat. I mean, we are still in a down economy with high unemployment, tremendously high unemployment in DeKalb and Gwinnett and Rockdale and Newton, actually higher than the state level. So for that conversation to even still be being made by anyone in the media or politically, I think it's a fallacy of thought right now.
And that concludes round one. It's now time for our candidates to ask a question of their opponent. Each candidate has 30 seconds for the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Greg Pallen will ask the first question. Gentlemen.
Chris, as you well know, spending bills originate in the House. Congressmen control the purse strings of our nation. I'm a business owner with 26 years of experience, pinching pennies, balancing budgets, cutting spending, and creating jobs. I am qualified for this position. As a pastor, what are your fiscal and financial qualifications for this position?
Well, as a pastor, which I always think it's funny when someone says that a nonprofit isn't a profit, that just means that profits cannot go to an individual. It has to make money. It has to. We have employees at the church that I have. I have to oversee that to make sure that our income is never greater than our outgoes, so that our upkeep does not become our downfall. It's kind of a basic parallel. I do believe that I have those qualifications, and I actually stand ready to do it. There's actually not much difference between some of the responsibilities. It's funny to me how everybody always makes these comments that we need businessmen, and of course we do. We need that mindset, but you also need to have someone who can bridge gaps and deal within partnerships across the aisle and across to other people who want to fight to correct the course of this nation.
Automatic rebuttal.
Great. My belief is that we have to start holding our elected officials to a higher standard than the average citizen. You are a pastor. You do have a Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy that you did not disclose. I am an experienced business owner with an impeccable financial history. I am asking the voters of District 4 today, which one of us has the potential to do a better job for the American people?
Chris Vaughn, you may now ask a question of your opponent.
Well, I'm going to ask this in a question with the rebuttal. Greg, you've brought this up several times. I've addressed it several times. and I've given that answer to you. And on the other side, I believe that actually helps me, and I've never not disclosed that. The one thing that I want to ask you, for all the voters in the 4th District, is how do you feel that you can ask any voter in the 4th District for their vote in a primary, when in the last 10 years, according to voter records, you've not voted in any primary in 10 years?
I'll answer that, Chris, quite honestly. I was building my business for the last 26 years, and I worked like a madman doing that. I built a very successful business. I worked my tail off. The last 4 or 5 years, I've become a whole lot more interested in what I see going on in our country. I probably spend, in the last 4 to 5 years, 4 to 5 hours every day studying these issues. I know the issues, I know the numbers, and now I feel, I'm thankful that I was successful enough to be able to engage, and I'm still running my company at the same time, but I'm in a position where I can run for Congress and leave my company to good hands. I don't know that you necessarily have to have voted all your life to see the problems in this country, to study the problems and do something about them. And I think my business experience, again, in cutting spending, pinching pennies, is very important to accomplish that goal.
Mr. Vaughn, your rebuttal.
That's a great answer. But if you're actually presenting yourself to someone who, how long does it take to vote in a primary? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Most primaries is a very low percentage of turnout. And to sit and ask for someone's involvement and support, you love to, in many situations, you've loved to make hay of certain things that I've been very open with the voters on. And I think it's just a fallacy to sit here and present yourself as a champion of the people when for at least 5 elections you've not taken 10 minutes to go vote in a primary.
Gentlemen, that concludes our second round of questioning. For those who may just be joining our program in progress, this is the debate between the Republican candidates in the primary election for Georgia's 4th Congressional District. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of the candidates of his or her choice. Candidates will be allowed 60 seconds to respond. As moderator, I'll determine if an opposing candidate will be given 30 seconds for rebuttal. We begin this round with a question from Walter Jones. Walter.
Well, I'd sort of follow up on that question. You're asking people in the Republican Party in the 4th District to support you in a run for Congress. What kind of credentials have you gotten, Mr. Pallen, in terms of working within the party to help strengthen the party, and why make your first leap in a run for Congress?
The answer to that question is that I believe that my qualifications, the ability to work with people every day, the ability to cut spending, the ability to pinch pennies, the ability to balance budgets is what we need in Washington right now. And to work, I don't spend a lot of time with the Republican Party. I go to the meetings, but I feel that we need independence. We need independent, liberty-minded Republicans that want to do the right thing, that not necessarily fall into the pitfalls of the system. We know what we have. We have a 9% congressional approval rating. We have huge problems. We have a lot of corruption. We need new blood that is willing to look in from the outside, see the problems, and do something about them, have the integrity and the courage to do something about them.
Well, are you saying that part of the problem is the Republican Party? That you need independence from that?
I don't think there's any doubt. Again, if we have a 9% congressional approval rating, I don't think it's the Republican Party, but there's individuals within the Republican Party that aren't doing the country justice. I think that's just obvious,
Our next question, Michelle Wright.
Mr. Vaughn, why are you the best person, or why do you feel you are the best person to represent District 4?
Well, I came to this decision. I've been married 24 years. I'm very proud to have my wife and 3 children with me. I pastor a church actually in Henry County. My life and commerce, my children are a part of schools in Rockdale and Newton. I look at it really from that pastoral sense, and if you will, and I'm not trying to become churchy with that. Ministry is about taking care of people, seeing after people's needs. I've actually come into contact with many constituents, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independents in the 4th, who've came to me and actually said, I cannot get results or access from my current congressman. And I'm not trying to cast blame or aspersions, but there just needs to be a certain level. And I believe that attitude of public service to people, not just for, if you will, just for the money, gives me that perspective. And I have extremely strong support within the party and some great endorsements from Herman Cain to the state school superintendent, Melvin Everson, and even support from congressmen.
Tom Baxter.
Mr. Pallen, this is the only question that I've asked in both debates, and that's because in a lot of ways I think this is a question that has to be debated in both parties. Do you believe that human beings are primarily responsible for climate change? And if so, what do you think is government's responsibility to address it?
I think that human beings obviously have an effect on water quality, air quality, with industry, since the Industrial Revolution especially. But I think that whole situation is being oversold so that we can instill the cap and trade, so we can come up with more taxes. I think it's really being used as an excuse. I'm not saying, again, that we don't have environmental issues, but this cap and trade scheme is a scheme of Ken Lay, Al Gore. I don't particularly trust those individuals to dictate policy in that regard.
Mr. Vaughn, I'd like to give you 30 seconds to rebut on this very issue.
Well, I think my opinion is the jury's still out. There was a report this week, actually, from one of the news wires, speaking actually about how there's, due to tree rings, that we've been in a global cooling for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, personally. Right. I believe some of that's out to debate, and for there to be excessive taxation upon the backs of every American for some pipe dream that we're not even sure about is not only unjust, it is unwrong. And as a congressman, I will always fight to make sure that every constituent is not taxed beyond their means for some lofty dream that is not true.
Walter Jones.
Mr. Vaughn, if you get elected, your very first vote would be on the leader of your party. Would you vote to re-elect Speaker Painter?
I'm not trying to be political. I'm really not. Personally, I want to have a sit down. I want to have that. I know there is angst within the core group of Republicans on which direction that. I like a good fight. I think we ought to have a good fight. I love the political process. I love that. So I'm going to say potentially no, but undecided, because that process will have to affect itself then. Plus, two, during that process, you don't know who else may step forward in a leadership position to want that and challenge the speaker. And so until that is decided, it would be really kind of hard to make that decision.
Michelle Wright.
Mr. Pallen, why do you believe the U.S. should not be associated with the UN?
I really, truly believe, and there's other contexts that I have, Paul Brown being one, that I actually have a recording of him saying that the U.S. needs to get out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S. There are courtrooms in this country where the UN flag hangs above the U.S. flag. The statue at the United Nations in New York City is in the plaza, in the main plaza, is a Smith & Wesson style pistol with a knot tied in the barrel. We have to be aware. I'm not giving up my guns. I believe in the Charlton Heston phrase, from my cold dead hands. I want to be able to protect myself. And I believe that the United Nations is interfering with American independence. And if we want to stay independent and we want to be free and we want to be an autonomous unit, not part of a United Nations, dictating policies worldwide, I kind of like my good old American values,
Tom Baxter.
Mr. Vaughn, you've spoken of repealing the health care bill and moving toward more of what you call consumer-driven solutions. But several insurance companies have already said they'll keep some of the provisions of the health care bill even if it's repealed, such as the one that allows parents to keep their children on their policies longer. Doesn't the fact that they didn't have those policies before the bill was passed make a pretty strong argument, and the fact that they're going to change now make it the argument that consumers have already made it clear that they approve some parts of the bill?
No, because I don't agree with that, because it just proves that market forces dictate who buys what insurance from what company sometimes. Now that there are insurance companies that are providing that, whether it's repealed or not, now we get into a market force where this company offers something, this company doesn't. It is.
So you're saying you don't want to go back to the status quo. When you repeal the bill, you want to do something else.
This is the big misnomer I've said for several years now. I've heard on the media and everybody say, well, there's no plans. There's just nothing on the table. And that's just not true. Two great congressmen in Georgia, Tom Price and Paul Brown, both have health care legislation. Paul Brown's 2 years before Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, was passed. So there's many options. There's been many programs. There's been many opportunities. But as we all know, many times it does get into who's going to get the credit and who's going to get the street cred for it and how the fight takes its place. So I'm not saying that there's certain provisions, but as far as the largest tax increase that's in America, that's been passed on the American people, it does need to be repealed.
Next question is from Walter Jones.
Mr. Pallen, I assume you're not a fan of tax increases as a Republican.
Most definitely not.
Is there any circumstance in which you would approve a tax increase?
I can't really think of one offhand. I guess this is going to be a short answer. No. I think that we need to cut spending so that we can cut taxes, like I said earlier, so that we can bring corporations back to America and get America back in motion, get people working. The two big issues, again, that I hear, I want a job, I want my taxes cut. That's my answer.
And Michelle Wright, your question.
Mr. Vaughn, you've mentioned, and we all know you are a lead pastor of a growing church. How are you going to handle those responsibilities if elected and you're traveling back and forth to Washington? Give the voters kind of a feel of how all that's going to happen.
Transpire?
Yeah.
I've actually made the commitment not only publicly but to my church, and this whole process for me, my value set's very specific. It is God, it is my wife, it is my children, it is my church, it is everything else. Or I can even say my country and values. That's very specific. I've been very specific to my church of what to expect let me rephrase that, when I win. But I've actually made the promise, I will still pastor my church. I will still be there Sundays. We are a very lay-led congregation, so there's certain ministries and responsibilities that are already in place that would give me that liberty. Some things would have to be put in place. But the other side of that is I've met too many people, and once you live in the gated community and you get out of touch with people, you lose reality and you lose concepts of what people go through and what it's like to struggle, to pay your bills, to be a husband, to be a father, to make those decisions. So this is actually one of the promises I have made to the constituents and to my church, that will be, because a congressman should be, in my opinion, somewhat of a part-time role.
And we have time for one more question. We'll give it to Tom Baxter.
Mr. Pallen, earlier you spoke about your experience as a small businessman building a business being valuable. Can you name one experience from your business career that you think would be of direct help to you as a congressman?
I can name a whole lot more than one, but I'll start with one. Every day when I go into my company, I look at what my costs are, I look at what my selling prices are, I look at how I can cut my costs, because I know I can't raise my retail prices in this economy. So I look at how I can cut spending, pinch pennies judiciously. That's the key, judiciously. We need to cut costs and cut spending judiciously, not across the board. I would like to see across the board cuts, but they need to be judicious. We can't cut all programs. We can't cut GPB, because I think your organization is doing a fine job. Even having these debates, televising these debates, is a great thing. Allows the American viewing public to see what the issues are. But again, back to your question, we need to cut spending, and that's what I look at every single day. Costs, selling prices, how can I cut costs judiciously so that we have a successful corporation? And government is no business different than a business. It shouldn't be.
And we have no more time for questions. Each of the Republican candidates in the Republican primary for Georgia's 4th Congressional District will now have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Chris Vaughn was randomly selected to make the very first statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, November 7th, we will all wake up and we will either know one of two things: that we have let our country drift even further, or we have helped right its course. I want to ask for your vote July 31st. I know what it's like to hurt. I know what it's like to fail. I know what it's like to build back your life and to pay your bills with your wife and your kids. But I also have the support and strong support within the party to go forward August 1st and fight for the 4th Congressional seat and take that fight to Hank Johnson. And so I want to ask for your vote July 31st. My name is Chris Vaughn. You can find out more about us on chrisvaughn.net, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you so much.
And our final closing statement comes from Greg Pallen.
Thank you. I'm Greg Pallen. I would truly appreciate your vote on July 31st. I believe I'm the only one in this race that has the business experience and acumen to fix the problems, the myriad of problems that we have in Washington. I would appreciate it if you would go to my website, Greg Pallen, Pallen, for Congress.com. And again, I would really appreciate your vote on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, both of you. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held this coming Tuesday, July 31st. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of distinguished journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate and many others like it. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. This broadcast has been streamed and will be available on demand on GPB's website. That URL is gpb.org. I'm Jonathan Seri. Thanks so much for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Stay with GPB for more debates straight ahead. Good night.
Become a better voter. Debates continue next with the Republican race for the 9th Congressional District on GPB.
This is a GPB original production.